All right, you just want to kick us off?
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining our webinar. Before we get started, just a quick intro on myself. My name is Anish. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Cortex. I've been building Cortex for about 3 years now, and it was largely based on our own experiences as engineers. I was previously an engineer at Uber. Basically, the classic case of microservices gone wrong. I think there were several hundred services on my team, thousands across the company, and I really saw firsthand how that hurt developer productivity. Everything from new engineer onboarding to just even understanding basic things like who owns a service, where does the documentation for that service live. But what was hardest though was really understanding, are these services meeting the best practices on our team across different tenants like reliability or security? So really excited to dive into the observations we found working with our own customers and leading engineering organizations who use microservices and service-oriented architectures. And I'll let Ganesh also introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks all for joining. I'm really excited to chat. Like Anish said, my name is Ganesh. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO of Cortex. Before Cortex, I was at a company called LendUp for a couple of years, saw the monolith to microservice journey that most organizations go through at some point. So I got to see everything from the first service all the way to the first 100, everything from the challenges of tracking service ownership, runbooks, dashboards, self-serve tooling, all the way to even service maturity and production readiness standards, and how hard it is to get people to care about those things. Very much the early inspiration for what we're working on with developer portals. We have done a couple webinars in the past about developer portals and kind of what they are and how to adopt them. If you're interested, definitely drop your email and we'll be happy to kind of get you some details on that as well. The focus of today's webinar is really going to be around everything that we learned last year about developer portals, microservices, how organizations are dealing with them, and how that kind of helped develop some of the features that we think are extremely important, just based on those observations. A lot of this comes from direct customer experiences from a lot of top engineering organizations. So we'll be kind of covering some of those stories today as well. But super excited to kind of continue this.
Awesome. Diving into the agenda for today, we'll be starting off talking about some of those challenges that we've seen a lot of organizations face as they start scaling their engineering team or the number of services across the company. We'll be going over what we've learned in 2022, some of Cortex's focus areas and learnings in how these organizations have actually tackled those challenges. We'll be giving a demo of Cortex and just explaining how Cortex helps to solve those challenges and how you can best use it as an internal developer portal for your organization. And then, of course, leaving time for a Q&A at the end. And so starting off with a little bit of a background, and I'm sure everyone at this webinar can relate to this, is that complex systems lead to major risks in the business. And the reality is that software as it stands today is made up of hundreds and sometimes thousands of components. And we've typically seen this in the form of microservices, libraries, data pipelines, Kafka consumers, databases, all the resources that exist in your AWS, GCP, or Azure account. And the reality is that each of these components comes with its own set of context, whether that's ownership, documentation, or the various integrations you have with internal tools or third-party systems, like, for example, Datadog or PagerDuty. And because of all this context and the surface area that's spread across all these services, it's just impossible to maintain context as an individual engineer about your modern architecture. And what ends up as a result, right, is your engineering team gets broken up into different silos. You have SRE, where oftentimes there's one SRE to 50 product engineering. The same applies to security. And each of these teams is working within their own domain and space, which means when something breaks, it can be really difficult to triage and figure out, where do I go to understand more about this service and all the different parts of my architecture? And the consequences of this seep in different ways too. You see institutional knowledge accumulate at an exponentially faster rate. We've all dealt with Google Docs that have been horribly outdated because the engineer who wrote that actually left the company, and they take that knowledge with them, especially if they were the original owner of the service. It leads to slower development cycles, which then in turn affect reliability and uptime. Oftentimes when there's an incident, most of the time is just triaging who's the actual owner of the service. I saw this a ton at Uber, where duplication of work often happens because, like we mentioned in the previous slide, information gets siloed within specific teams, and it becomes difficult to understand Are we actually reusing the same service? Are we building like duplicate ones? And then ultimately, I think this actually impacts OKRs as well, because leadership are unable to make informed decisions about where do we invest or where do we need to put additional resources, and helping people follow, reliability best practices or security best practices across the team. The solution is usually a spreadsheet like this one. I had to maintain one of these when I was at Uber. I'm sure everyone has seen one of these at their own companies. Each column is a different tool or data that you're trying to pull from. Could be internal, could be external, and you have just a list of all the services, and it's always out of date. It's hard to actually draw insights from this, like which teams are performing well or where should we be investing. Ultimately, I think the spreadsheet is one of the most harmful parts to developer productivity in general.
And so the solution to a lot of this is, kind of described by the problem set that we talk about, right? It's a single pane of glass to track your services infrastructure, really helping break down that institutional knowledge, the tribal knowledge that's building up across the organization. You want a single place where you can aggregate all those different tools across SRE tools, security tools, product engineering tools. And the real goal is, how do you improve developer onboarding? How do you improve developer productivity and general quality of life? Like we talked about, the benefits of microservices and the reason all of our customers move to a more microservice-oriented world is improved velocity, being able to ship faster, ship independently, deploy independently. But as the number of microservices grows, you end up with those risks. And a solution that, a platform that can provide some of these benefits will offset the risk and really help you reap the benefits of the microservice architecture. And so what this solution really is a developer portal. So your developer portal is generally comprised of a couple different pieces, usually a service catalog and an infrastructure resource catalog, both of which track your services or code-first assets like libraries, pub sub consumers, microservices, as well as an infrastructure catalog, which tracks all of your non-code assets like databases, buckets, load balancers, all the things that actually make up your infrastructure. And the idea is that by tracking all this in one place, you can then start defining ownership, metadata, all that information in a single source of truth, really helping break down a lot of those silos. Developer portals will also have self-serve tooling. So how do you make it easier to spin up microservices, follow the golden path, really enabling people to do their best without having to just always remember the things that they should be following in order to build high quality microservices. And finally, developer portals will have scorecarding. So not just the ability to track this stuff, but also enforce things about it. So you want to take that data. He says, hey, we finally have the service catalog. We have an infrastructure catalog. What next? What do we do with all this data? And the answer is usually we want to enforce things. We want to check, are our services meeting service quality standards? Are our services meeting security standards? And the scorecarding is a great way of enforcing that across the organization and driving the cultural change that you really care about, which becomes especially important with microservices, because one of the things that we learned is with microservices, one of the value propositions is giving teams a lot of autonomy, but at the same time, that autonomy can kind of lead to disparate technology choices, tech stacks, best practices. And so bringing that all into the developer portal can give people the same level of autonomy, but help you define that within the guardrails that you define in your organization. And so with that said, I want to transition into, all the things that we've learned, over the last year from working with leading engineering organizations. We've had the opportunity to work with top engineering organizations, and we've learned a lot about not just developer portals, but also how to successfully adopt them and the challenges that a lot of them are facing with microservices and their architectures. Some things that we really learned about and focused our efforts on that we'll be talking about today is service ownership. Ownership is obviously table stakes in the microservices organization, and you have to be able to drive 100% coverage of ownership. One of the interesting things that we learned about developer portals is a lot of organizations look to the developer portal to improve developer onboarding and time to code. So that portal should be an enabler in improving your productivity, not just for existing developers, but new developers that are coming on board as well. The other thing that we learned that was really interesting was that developer portal, Cortex for the first time brought a lot of visibility to organizations where there was none before. They didn't know what services they had. They didn't have any ownership, any metadata, any source of truth. And the moment you kind of give people that visibility, all of a sudden there's even more interest in increasing visibility, because now you see things that you didn't really know about before. And finally, we learned a lot about automation. There's so many things where developer portal can help. And there's additional opportunities to automate manual processes, like during the security incident, how do you automate some of the tracking and the management of those processes as well? And so starting with our core focus area, 100% coverage of ownership. At the baseline, the table stakes feature, service catalog will track your service ownership. But what we realized is in a complex microservices ecosystem, it's not just the microservices. The architecture does not end at the code. It includes all the underlying infrastructure, the foundations, everything that actually like the service actually touches. Because if you're running a true microservice organization, each team is accountable for the infrastructure that powers their services. If I'm a service owner and we're running a Postgres database for one of our services, I'm accountable for that. And that needs to be tracked somewhere. That needs to be cataloged somewhere. And that ownership needs to flow there as well. It needs to be clear that my team not only owns the microservice, but we also own that database. In the case of something like a security audit, GDPR compliance, things like that, you want to be able to go back and say, hey, this particular database is owned by this team, and we have a point of contact where we can go and ask them questions about this. Best practices and standards extend to infrastructure as well. You want to be able to enforce things on your infrastructure around, for example, you may enforce that all S3 buckets need to have versioning and encryption. And so you need some way to catalog all of your infrastructure assets in one place. And for those reasons, ownership should cover infrastructure. So if your architecture covers your code, not just the code, but also the infrastructure, if best practices extend there, then it makes sense that ownership should also cover infrastructure assets. And to solve for this, we actually launched what we call our resource catalog. So this drives ownership of your infrastructure assets. It improves that visibility into what's generally a black box. Most developers don't have access to the AWS console. If they do, it's very hard to understand exactly what's there and what that context is. And now you're basically giving 100% coverage on the entire surface area of your architecture. And the resource catalog can automatically ingest infrastructure from AWS, Azure, GCP, and other sources as well. The other thing that we learned, especially from longtime adopters of our developer portal, is that they were seeing very, very large improvements in developer time to code. The developer portal naturally becomes the home for new and existing developers. And so when somebody joins your team, you say, hey, check out the developer portal. This is the home for everything that we do. It's going to give you information about our architecture, what's out there, the systems, the things that you're going to be touching. When you think about a service catalog and the features that come with it, you generally think about operations, incident management, that source of truth for existing developers. But treating the developer portal as an opportunity to improve developer onboarding leads to some interesting insights. It's a unique opportunity to massively improve that time to code because it's a single place where a developer can come in and quickly build that context. It removes those silos around tribal knowledge. And so we spend a lot of time investing in this particular part of the developer workflow, which especially large organizations can be an extremely expensive and costly process for new engineers. We've heard anything from 2 weeks to 4 months as standard engineering onboarding times, and we're seeing anywhere from 30 to 55% improvement in developer onboarding thanks to the developer portal. On this note, one of the things that we launched this year is our developer homepage. So the developer homepage is essentially, I like to call it the iGoogle or my Yahoo for developers, where you log in and you get all the context across all of your tools in a single place for your daily workflow. So everything from your open pull requests to the health of your services to action items on the scorecards and service maturity, security standards, information about on-call. So the real goal is here, how do we improve onboarding time through knowledge sharing, and how do we accelerate developer velocity? The other thing that we really focus on is increasing visibility. One of the really interesting learnings and something that we hadn't thought about was that getting to a baseline level of visibility actually increases awareness of unknown unknowns. You realize, hey, there's so much that we didn't know about, and now we have even more questions about what's out there. And one of our customers who's been using Cortex for a very long time, Matthew Gates, the principal engineer at 8x8, he basically told us hey, it's one of those things where once you have it, you say how do we live without this thing? We have so many questions that we're now able to answer, and so many questions that we're able to ask or even think about thanks to having that single source of truth. And that's not something we really thought about. We had really thought about the service catalog as being this baseline of information, but it does open up so many different questions. And what we realize is then that data is then scattered across multiple tools. and it makes it hard to understand areas of risk across reliability and security. And so what we did here is we built two very interesting features called the CQL report and the query builder. So all of our scorecards are built on top of this language called CQL, which basically lets you tap into all the data in your catalog, everything from your third-party integrations to metadata to ownership. Pretty much everything that you can think about for a service can be accessed through this language. And you're now able to query that, you're able to build reports and combine multiple different data sources. And so now that you have the catalog and you have these new questions, you can start asking those questions to your catalog directly. For example, you might ask questions about how many services are using an outdated version of Java or Log4j, and being able to answer those questions really easily, break it down by tier, criticality, area, things like that as well. And finally, the really interesting thing that we learned as well is like even more automation. Developer portals bring a level of automation to a lot of internal processes that didn't exist before. Everything from incident management to security processes and things like that. And the developer portal can drive a lot of automation. Cortex, for example, have features around the scorecarding where you can automatically track all your services and enforce things across your entire architecture, and then drive initiatives where you can set deadlines and say, hey, I need everybody to complete this particular part of the scorecard by a certain date. And what we started seeing is that feature can actually be used in very high intensity incidents, such as the Log4j issue that happened. And so what we saw was that the developer portal, Cortex, became the center of critical initiatives like that. And the more automation you have in a moment like that, the better. And at SoFi, they were actually able to drive a lot of their Log4j mitigation through Cortex. So instead of trying to spend, instead of spending 3 weeks building a database of all their services and which services were potentially affected, you can just query that information and write an initiative in Cortex to drive that and automatically assign it to service owners. And what that means and what we learned out of that is a couple things. One, it's very important to have out of the box integrations, because when something like this hits, you're able to quickly go in, write scorecard rules, drive initiatives with those integrations. So you're not spending time building your own manual integrations, custom connectors when you need it the most. And so those out of the box integrations are extremely important. And we've actually added more than 20 integrations last year. You also want to be able to meet engineers where they work. It's not enough to say like, hey, go log into Cortex, check your developer portal. That's one piece of it, but you also want to meet them where they're working. So you want to drive Slack notifications. You want to create Jira tickets for them. And so that way it's part of their daily workflow. It's something that you can use to drive through the automation, but you're meeting them where they work. And so we built things like initiatives in Jira. So you can not only drive initiatives through Cortex, but we'll automatically create Jira tickets for you for those action items. So let's say, out of 100 services, 15 of them are affected by Log4j. We'll automatically create action items for that in Jira and assign them to the right service owners. That way you're more focused on actually driving that to completion, then doing that audit and creating tickets and doing the kind of manual effort that's required to drive these incidents. And finally, through automatic discovery, through the discovery audit, we can actually help you build 100% confidence in your catalog and say, hey, here are all the things that we found in your environment that are not being tracked today. Here's how you can build that confidence and make sure that when something like this happens, that your catalog is comprehensive, all the data exists in there, and you're able to trust the catalog to answer and drive these kinds of incidents. And so with that said, I want to touch a little bit about, what is Cortex and show you a demo of the actual product that we're really excited about. One of the things that we are really proud of is that a lot of what we build is based on our customer feedback. Like we just talked about, these are all things that we learned today. Developer portals obviously are a fairly new thing, and we're able to learn so much about developer portals from our customers who are adopting this at scale and tell us both the existing challenges and the new things that they're seeing as they adopt those developer portals. And so really excited to show you some of the things that we've learned as we kind of walk through the product. At a high level, Cortex is a developer portal. We make it easy for engineering organizations to gain visibility into their services, but more importantly, the why, it's to deliver high quality software, is to add business value to drive, developer productivity and efficiency. And that's what we really believe a developer portal can do. But it's easier to show you what a developer portal is than to talk about it. So with that said, we want to jump into a demo, and I'll hand it over to Anish to show you what we've been working on.
Awesome. Always like to start off demos with this spreadsheet. We showed this in an earlier slide, but this is typically how we've seen organizations track services today, everything from service ownership to even complicated initiatives like Log4j or production readiness checklists. Like I mentioned earlier, it's very difficult to keep this up to date. but even harder to draw insights from this. And really, to solve this problem, we created this product called scorecards. And so scorecards at a high level, they basically let you track metrics for a group of services. And the goal is, how do we incentivize behavior in the right direction? And so I have the same spreadsheet model as a scorecard here. And if I click into it, you'll see all of the services have now been mapped to a different level. And this level is corresponding to different rules that I've defined. The really powerful part about Cortex is that we have over 40 direct integrations with all of the common tools that you probably use today. APM tools like New Relic or Datadog, to operational tools like SonarCube and Jira. You can even actually push in custom data to Cortex and use that in scorecards to grade and evaluate. And for every integration, we actually expose all of their APIs that let you pull data into a scorecard and then grade it. And so, for example, we have rules here like, are my Datadog SLOs defined in passing, or is my MTTR less than 1 hour from PagerDuty? The really nice thing about Cortex and scorecards in particular is that it's completely customizable to fit the needs of your team and organization. And so we have bronze, silver, gold here. And as engineers complete the rules, they're basically awarded the level, but you can actually customize it with any amount of levels or rules that fit the initiative or criteria that you want. We've also found that it almost creates this gamification of service quality. Everyone loves seeing their services at the highest level, in this case, gold. And so we've actually seen a lot of the companies we work with just naturally build this culture of reliability and service ownership, because engineers get these notifications letting them know how their services are performing. And it becomes really easy to understand, this is exactly what's expected of me to achieve the next level of service quality excellence. The really great thing is we also actually generate these reports that can break down the quality into different types of reports, essentially. My favorite is this bird's eye report. It breaks down into this heat map view. And for example, I can now switch to teams and actually import the org chart into Cortex. And now if I'm a VP of engineering, I can actually see the teams that report up to me and how their services are performing in aggregate. You can quickly spot trends in the data, and it becomes easier then to understand areas of risk in the business across reliability or security or any of the scorecards that you define. We often see companies create 5 to 7 different scorecards, each tracking different things. Common ones are production readiness, security standards, DORA metrics, operational maturity, or development maturity. And they really go hand in hand to really create this objective view of how service quality is performing. Now, you might be wondering, okay, there's 10 or 15 rules in the scorecard. Is everyone really going to reach 100% all the time? Well, obviously not. We found that scorecards can be aspirational in the sense, and every quarter, you'll probably want to prioritize a few of them that are important to you. Maybe it's part of OKR planning or just an initiative like a security migration that you need everyone to complete by a deadline. So to help enable this, we actually built this product called initiatives, where in a given scorecard, I can prioritize rules or a level and set a deadline, and will actually assign action items to engineers based on the services that they own. So this is a view, if I'm an engineer and I log into Cortex, I can quickly actually see, these are all the initiatives I have. Looks like they're due in 2 days. These are actually all the failing scorecards rules I have that are a part of the services that I own. And it's just a really easy view for me to understand exactly what I should be focused on according to the different initiative or scorecard that my services are a part of. Like Ganesh mentioned earlier, this actually has a direct integration with Jira. We will automatically create Jira tickets based on the initiatives that you create and close them out automatically as engineers complete the initiative. So as soon as someone completes something, we'll actually Slack them or email them, automatically close the Jira ticket and manage the entire process. So there's a lot of automation built into the product to make it easy to track these different initiatives that you have. The core of the product and where the data comes from really comes from the catalog, which is split into 2 entities. You have the service catalog and resource catalog, which is a new addition to our product that we recently released. The service catalog is meant for your more traditional code-first microservices. It could be libraries, but these are really code-first entities that you want to track, maybe from your APM tool or Kubernetes. And the resource catalog is for your infrastructure. So you can actually automatically import from cloud providers like AWS or GCP, or even define custom types of resources that are unique to your organization. But if I click into a service, you'll basically see this is the service homepage. It has everything I would need to work with the service. So you can track everything from service ownership to the Slack channels the service has, You can see the scorecards it's a part of, even documentation. And then the really cool thing is we'll build a single pane of glass with all of your integrations. And so you can see all the information in one place. For example, the on-call rotation for the service. We actually have a service discovery onboarding flow where we can connect to several sources. It could be Kubernetes, APM tools, Git repos, and then we'll actually try to automatically map services with all the data around them, looking at things like the service name or even Git repo attached to the service. And so, for example, we can try to map the on-call service to the Git repo, looking at the service name. How Cortex works is every service is defined as a YAML file. So it's all really code first. We'll generate these YAML files for you at the end of the onboarding flow. And you can actually edit everything through the UI and we'll manage this YAML file for you. But most of our customers actually have a GitOps workflow where they'll put this YAML file into their Git repo and Cortex will actually automatically process it on every merge to master through one of the GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket apps we have. One more thing I'll mention is that Cortex actually is both cloud and self-hosted supported. We have a Helm chart that you can deploy into your own network. Sometimes customers have everything hosted on-prem, and so we actually can support that as well through our on-prem installation. Resource catalog works in the exact same way, but the really nice thing is you can actually see the type of resource it is, the information from AWS, and then you can even write scorecards and all this information, which makes it really great to then enforce the quality of, and you can do this in the service catalog as well. And the really nice thing about ownership is that we can actually integrate with your IDP. So for example, we can link services to Okta teams and then pull in the actual engineers who work in those groups. The nice thing is that keeps it updated with your IDP. And so even if engineers leave or join the team, that information will actually stay up to date. And so one of the interesting things that we just launched a few months ago that we're super excited about is the developer homepage. Like Ganesh was mentioning, one of the common problems that we've seen is that, especially when an engineer joins a team, there's so much information overload about what they should be focused on. You know, you have all your Git PRs that you have to review, the services that you own, even the JIRA tickets that are assigned to you. And so we decided to consolidate all of that into one place to make it really easy for engineers to understand exactly what they should be focused on across all the work that's assigned to them. And so as soon as I log in, I can see the services and resources I own. I can see the PRs that are awaiting my review, even my open PRs, and then even the JIRA tickets that are assigned to me. And Cortex actually has a recommendation engine built into the product that'll highlight quick wins or important things that I should be focused on. Like maybe I have a PR that I opened that's 3 months old. Maybe it should, maybe we should just close it. And so those are kind of the interesting things that Cortex can start highlighting to engineers on the team. We'll even help you understand when you're on call, which is a pretty useful feature. One of the other interesting products we just launched is our CQL report. So the really cool thing about Cortex is that all of the scorecard rules are built on an underlying language called CQL or Cortex query language. You don't need to know the language to actually build a scorecard rule. It's all UI based. But the nice thing is we do expose it in like as a query language. And you can use it in any type of reporting as well. So you can actually pull in the actual data from all of the different tools you're using and generate reports based on them. A really good use case for this is security. For example, you can see here, you're pulling in the actual data across all these different metrics that you're tracking. One of the other really powerful parts of our product is Scaffolder. So, one of the big problems that we've seen is that because teams are siloed, they start building services in all sorts of different ways. And then when you're doing a migration, it can be really difficult to actually track and understand, are people following the best practices and even creating services? And so to help with that, we built this product called Scaffolder, where you can basically define templates that engineers can use to spin up services. And so, for example, if I'm an engineer, I can come in here, I can select the Go template, I fill out the form, and then Cortex will actually create the Git repo, run the templating engine, scaffold the code, and then manage the entire process of creating a service end to end. And so your best practices are then being met from day one. Finally, I wanted to talk about the query builder. So kind of going back to CQL, Query Builder actually lets you search across all of your services infrastructure and tooling to find the information that you need. So you can do something as simple as show me which services are Dockerized to when Log4j was happening. A lot of our customers use Query Builder to quickly look up affected services and then contact their owners. And so it's a pretty useful tool just to search across all of your infrastructure. And we'll actually show you all of the services that are matching, which then you can then run in an initiative or apply a scorecard to. So overall, Cortex is an internal developer portal that's comprised of all these different products. But the goal really is to improve developer productivity, reduce service complexity, and increase visibility into all the different parts of building services, tracking them, and understanding their entire service lifecycle.
Awesome. And with that said, we're now in the Q&A section. Thank you everyone for attending. We'll be around to answer any questions that you may have, either about developer portals, about Cortex, anything in between, our experiences with customers. Just drop those questions in the Q&A down at the bottom, and we'll kind of go through and answer those live. Question coming in, are scaffolder templates customizable? Yes, they are. So we actually use an open source project called Cookie Cutter underneath the hood. And Cookie Cutter is an industry standard templating scaffolding tool. You can build your own Cookie Cutter templates. They're fairly straightforward to build, and you just drop that in straight into Cortex, and those templates will work. So the vast majority of our customers are running fully customized templates in the scaffolder. Question coming in on the scorecards. Scorecards customizable. What kind of integrations do you have, and can we extend the data? Scorecards are fully customizable. You can build as many scorecards as you want. We usually see everything from security to production readiness to security to service maturity scores. The cool thing is that they can be extremely holistic. We have integrations for everything from Git, so all of your Git providers, to APM, to monitoring, to even security tools like Sneak, Whitesource, Mend, and things like that. Those are the scorecards are fully extendable as well. So you can build your own, you can send in any JSON data you want into Cortex, and we have built-in JQ in scorecards, so you can munge that data and use that in scorecards. So a lot of our customers are sending in their own custom data, either from CI/CD pipelines like vulnerability reports or things of that nature. Another question coming in, how do you define infrastructure in, say, Kubernetes applications? In our org, developers are usually told not to worry about the underlying infra. Some more details about that. So in a Kubernetes application, obviously you have like the actual plots or stateful sets or deployments or rollouts that are kind of the deployment strategy for the microservice itself. That's kind of what we consider the actual service instance. And so in a particular service, you can get details about, what is it, where does the service live from a code standpoint, where is it deployed, Kubernetes information. So if I pull in an example here, you can see like, hey, this particular service is running in 2 different clusters. These are the containers that are running, things of that nature. Outside of that, this particular service may be talking to databases, may be talking to S3 buckets. And you want to kind of have that visibility around, hey, not just where is this running in Kubernetes, what versions are running, but actually what is the underlying infrastructure assets about that. And so you can kind of come into the dependencies and see, hey, this service is using this S3 bucket. This is the data, it's a cold storage. And then you can click into that and you can actually see information about it. So if I click in here, you can say this particular infrastructure does contain PII, it's versioned. And so you're getting that visibility into not just the service, but everything that it touches. And what we find is that, especially during incidents, that can really help, or during compliance, things like GDPR compliance or SOC 2 or things of that nature as well. How easy is it to add a microservice to Cortex if it's not currently integrated? And how long does it generally take for Cortex to integrate with the new service? That's a great question. So we actually, it takes less than a minute to add a new microservice to Cortex. There's 2 ways of doing it. One is if you're using the scaffolder to create a service, You've created your own Java Spring Boot template that people are using for the golden path. They create a service through that. It will actually automatically add that project to the catalog. So that way, if folks are going through the scaffolder, you can be sure that no new projects are being lost. They will always be cataloged in the scaffolder. Outside of that, you can one-click import through the UI. So you can say like, here's everything that we've discovered, and you can automatically import those repositories. And so that's what we usually recommend for that initial import. In the long term, what we see from 90% plus of our customers is that they move to a GitOps model. And so all the services are defined in these YAML definitions. And this basically describes that service. And we generate this for you automatically as you do things on the UI. But you can just drop this in your repository and we'll automatically pick it up. And so if you have an existing service, you can just put this in there and we'll process that automatically. So to recap, you can use the UI to import things pretty easily. You can use a GitOps model, or the best case is use a scaffolder for all new projects and they get picked in the moment that project is created. Question in here about just generally like what is sorry, the question just disappeared. How is Cortex different from other developer portals? The couple of biggest things that we think are extremely important for a developer portal is the infrastructure catalog with the resource catalog. The scorecarding is an extremely powerful aspect with out-of-the-box integrations. Like we talked about earlier, what we saw with a lot of our customers is that those integrations make it a lot easier to define the scorecards and drive those cross-org initiatives. And so being able to come in and say like, hey, I want to make sure that all of our services have 0 critical vulnerabilities on Sneak. That's not something you want to necessarily build by yourself when things are hitting the fan, let's say. And so in those moments, those out-of-the-box integrations make it a lot easier to drive those initiatives across the organization. Outside of that, the developer homepage, being able to drive, not just the cataloging and the ownership and the scorecarding, but driving developer onboarding, recommending insights and quick wins that people should be working on, all add a ton of value. And what we see really drives adoption of the developer portal overall. Cool. I think that wraps up the questions. We'll stick around for another 5 or 10 minutes if folks have other questions. But thank you again, everyone, for joining the webinar. Always really excited to talk developer portals and how we can help engineering organizations improve productivity, developer onboarding, velocity. So if you have any questions, definitely reach out to us, shoot us an email. I'm happy to kind of give you to give a more in-depth demo as well. Question coming in about are we able to share the recording for this webinar? I'm not 100% sure. I will double check afterwards and let you know that as well. Is there an automated alerting setup to email users when warnings or errors appear in Cortex? Great question. So we do actually have lots of built-in notifications. So for example, when there's new action items for an ongoing initiative, for scorecards that my service may have dropped or started failing specific checks for specific rules for like a service maturity scorecard or a security scorecard, we actually do send notifications for those, and we'll say, hey, your particular service has dropped to the bronze level. These are the reasons why you're starting to fail this rule around security vulnerabilities, and those will be included as part of both those automated notifications as well as a weekly report that goes out to all service owners. Right, well, go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you again so much for everyone that came out to the webinar. Definitely shoot us an email if you have any feedback or if you have any ideas for what you want to see, what you want us to talk about in the next webinar. Definitely drop us a note, shoot us an email, and always happy to give another demo of the product or do a technical deep dive on specific features that may be of interest. Really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much for coming out, and looking forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.